It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Jennifer Pasquale, a culture consultant, strengths nerd, and energetic facilitator with 20 years in training and development. As a dual certified strengths and master professional coach, Jen uses her corporate training, change management, and psychology backgrounds to help teams unlock their potential and build a culture of curiosity, connection, and collaboration. Spending most of her career as a corporate trainer, facilitator, and curriculum designer has allowed Jen to support her clients in their unique goals by helping them realize long-term success with critical initiatives. Jen lives in Northern Virginia with her husband of 18 years, their 2 high schoolers, and 2 ginger cats. And I am truly pleased to have her here with me today. Hello, Jen. How are you today?
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Great to have you here with me. Let's dive in, as I like to say. So, Jen, from your bio, I have learned you are a supporter of Clifton Strengths. Can you tell me and my listeners and viewers about Clifton Strengths and why you are a believer in their methodology?
I discovered Clifton Strengths the second time a couple of years ago. And for me, it was something that came along at a time when I really needed to get unstuck. It's a tool that is under the Gallup umbrella. A lot of folks are probably familiar with Gallup as a research organization, but they also have a lot of other functions that they and tools that they provide. And the Clifton Strengths Assessment is one that they provide. It has a long history. The research of it goes back to the 40s in positive psychology, and it's really about helping individuals gain language for what their inherent talents are and what they may not be. So it's really understanding both sides of who you are. And so for me, it was a really pivotal thing to help me get out of an unstuck period and really understand what my value was and have a whole different language set for how to explain that value to others.
Yeah, getting unstuck sometimes can be a problem. You come up against the old story is it's the forest and the trees, right? You're up so close to it. You do a reflection point, some way to back up a little and figure out what's really going on. Let me ask you this, though. I'm very curious. How would you differentiate Clifton Strengths, or would you differentiate Clifton Strengths from, let's say, the Myers-Briggs personality testing?
So I'm familiar with a lot of the different assessments. With a psych background, assessments are my thing. I enjoy them. I find it all very interesting. So I'm familiar with Myers-Briggs. And I think for me, they all have their own value. I think my perspective on strengths is that it tends to provide a really great foundation because it's so incredibly detailed and nuanced. And what I find in some of the other assessments that are available is they're a great add-on to strengths. Once you have that kind of base understanding and base foundation, then we can add in Myers-Briggs because it zooms out a little bit. It doesn't look at you in the 34 different dimensions that the Clifton Strengths is going to look at you in. There's certainly fewer of those in how Myers-Briggs or DISC or some of the other, with how they offer and what they offer.
Very interesting. Let's to the next question. I have in the past year turned my attention to the subject of burnout and its impact on people. My approach is rooted in working to understanding the implication of leadership ideas or models that affect the cause of and that affect and cause burnout. Can you describe your approach? From what vantage point do you view burnout?
So, what I've seen with organizations that are really struggling with burnout is sometimes it comes down to the ability to really articulate what is behind it, what you need, why you're struggling. And this is where I think the curiosity becomes a really important sort of method, if you will, and an angle for how to understand what's going on with our people from a little bit different way. And so for me, that curiosity is really about connecting with people, understanding more than just what life is like for them at work, but really understanding the whole person. And that to me, that's how we start to understand the burnout problem, is to understand the whole person that's coming with the challenge.
I want to make a statement here and get your reflection on it.
Sure.
Okay. When I look at the implication of leadership, for example, one of the things I normally talk about, three things. I'm sure my viewers and listeners are saying to themselves, he's not going to talk about this again, is he? Yeah, I am. I'm sorry. There are three things that the modern workforce, the skill talent pool, are looking for in organizations. Number one is values alignment. They want to make sure that you care about the same things they care about. Number two is, and this is huge for me, being involved in the decision making processes of the organization. People want to matter and they want their work to matter. They're looking for a level of control and autonomy over their own destinies. And the third one is training and learning that it helps them advance their professional, hopefully personal lives. When I look at the implication of leadership ideas and models and reflecting back on my own life, I have reached a point of burnout several times in my life. And there were times in my life when I was working ungodly hours and you couldn't burn me out. You could try,
Mm-hmm.
but you couldn't burn me out. So I contrasted the two of those things together. And I said the difference was when I was burned out, I felt like I had no control. That I had somehow lost control of my life, lost control of my circumstances. But when I wasn't able to be burned out, I felt like I mattered. I was in the middle of it. That had the fire in my belly, if you will, and just was able to make a difference more than anything else, at least in my mind and the work that I was doing. I would love to get your reflection on that in terms of how you think that affects burnout in your mind.
Oh, I think it's a huge part of burnout. And I think as you're talking, what I'm thinking through is the fact that the work that I do is really about that intersection, right? It is about helping people understand their value, communicate their value, and be able to have leaders that now have this perspective of what they bring to the table, be able to leverage them in that way. Because I think sometimes where burnout comes from is this misalignment that can happen within organizations and with individuals that are in roles that maybe not necessarily they're not qualified, but that role doesn't necessarily allow them to bring the best of who they inherently are to the table. They're being asked to do things that are not part of their innate skill set. And if we can realign people to the things that are just innately part of who they are, like the data that Gallup has is clear, individuals are happier, they're more engaged, they have better retention, better loyalty, like all the things that organizations want to see. But this other byproduct is less burnout, because part of it is not just burning the candle at both ends, but it's also burning the wrong candle at both ends, which is sometimes what individuals end up doing in an organization. So I think you're spot on. I think being seen, being valued, being heard, feeling like you matter, all those things are incredibly important. I would argue that I think Strengths has this really amazing ability to give both individuals and leaders the language of what that could look like.
Very interesting. One of the cautions of Myers-Briggs, and I'm just want to explore this from the Clifton Strengths perspective.
Yeah.
But one of the cautions of Myers-Briggs is make sure you don't put people in a box. In other words, this is the most profound discovery about this individual that you can find. These are preferences. These are particular preferences, at least from a Myers-Briggs perspective. Does the same exist for Clifton? Are you really talking more about preferences here than anything else?
So I don't know that I would necessarily say it's preferences as much as it is this kind of innate tendency. So to me, there is a slight difference. What is true of the Clifton Strengths world is that there's a lot more. Goes back to my first answer, right? There's a lot more nuance. So as an example, in Myers-Briggs, someone might be an introvert and an extrovert, and we have these kind of preconceived ideas about what it means to show up as an introvert or show up as an extrovert. What I find in strengths work is that I can look at 10 profiles of 10 introverts, and they're going to all look incredibly different because there's so much more dimension to the understanding. We know that they can be like, I'm an introvert, but I'm an activator. Someone else might not have that particular talent. And so how they show up might look a little bit different. And so I think it isn't quite the same, where we're not really putting people in a specific box, but what we're doing is giving people language to understand this is inherently just how I approach problems and people and tasks. And so the more I'm able to approach these in the way that I'm naturally designed, I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to be more effective. The quality is going to be higher. So I don't see it as a box, and maybe there's people that do, but I also find that there's a lot of flexibility. As an example, in the strengths model, there's 4 domains, which is the people either kind of executing or influencing or relationship focused or strategic focused. But there's a lot of fluidity in that. So I can have a talent that sits under one of those umbrellas, but I can use it in a different way. I can use an executing talent in a relationship building way. So there, in some ways, I actually don't see a lot of kind of boundaries in the way that you might find in some other tools that are similar.
Fair enough. I appreciate that very much. Can you give me an example of someone that you coached, someone who was perhaps stuck or struggling in your practice? What was the issue? What was your quote unquote intervention? And how did that, if you will, what was the result? How did that work out for them?
Yeah, there's a lot of people to pull from on that. One that comes to mind, relatively recent, is there's a talent called Maximizer. And this was actually me coaching another coach, right? All coaches need coaches, but this was someone who has high Maximizer. And so Maximizer is an influencing talent. It is individuals who just inherently want to make things better. That is just how they view the world. They always feel like there's one more step we can take to improve on something. And so they're always looking through that. How do we improve and how do we get better? And so the sort of the stuck nature for this person was really feeling like the work she was doing wasn't quite good enough. And yet, in kind of contrast to all the evidence over the course of our coaching session, we talked, what's the evidence for that story, right? What is the evidence that shows that you aren't providing the value that others are telling you, but you're not believing it? And why is that? And so what we essentially did was break down all the evidence and help her really see that when she looked at it objectively, that maximizer turned up too high. So I often will talk this as a dial. So being able to turn the dial up or turn the dial down based on the need of the situation. And so in her case, her maximizer was just running the show a little bit and getting a little ahead of her. And so her awareness was recognized that was what was happening, and being able to temper that by really being able to take in information, use some of her other talents to listen to the people around her, and really trust what was being told to her about her value and her impact on the organization. So I think that's one example that comes to mind.
Great. I appreciate that very much. In our work up to this podcast event today, I have learned that you have turned your attention to the idea of curiosity as a cornerstone of leadership. Can you describe why you think or feel this way?
Yeah, so this kind of came a couple of years ago, but it has been something that it's that thing that won't go away, right? The thing just keeps tapping you on the shoulder. And so we recently went through a rebranding for my organization, and I decided to make this part of our rebrand because it was really important to me that this was the message and the work that we were doing. For me, the curiosity really started to spur around strengths, because what I started to see in organizations was leaders who had these ideas about people. They had a perception of why someone maybe wasn't living up to the potential that they saw in them, or was struggling with their milestones or their deadlines on a project. They had their own ideas that were rooted in their own history and their own filters. And so what I started to notice as I was doing strengths work with leaders and teams is this kind of shared understanding that was created in this environment of, oh, that is why you ask questions in that particular way. That is why you work better when tasks are organized in that way. And so leaders started to develop this new understanding about people they'd worked with for years. and what it was about cultivating curiosity within that relationship, both for the leader to understand, how am I showing up? And how am I showing up in ways that I don't even see because I don't have language for it? But once I do, now I can own that this is my style. This is where it comes from. And so leaders change their language for themselves. And then I watch the people that they are leading also sit a little taller and gain this understanding of, oh, this is how I do it. And that's okay. But I have a responsibility to be able to communicate to my colleagues, here's really what would be helpful for me in how we work together. And so it's this curiosity that goes in, it's like a 360 curiosity, right? The leader, the colleagues, the person they're supervising, it doesn't really matter who it is. It's everybody in the organization wanting to lean into and believing that they might be wrong, testing that whatever theory or whatever preconceived idea they may have about someone, using the strengths work as an opportunity to really test that or validate that, and then have this new information as part of that entire effort.
I agree with this notion of curiosity being incredibly important. And let me tell you why. My leadership model that I started developing over 30 years ago has one basic premise. One. And that is, it's founded on the idea of contribution. Okay. So it's all about contribution. So rather than making judgments about anybody in the room or anything else, you put a problem down in front of a group of people, for example, an issue, and you say, hey, you could say, I'm curious. Has anybody got any ideas? Anybody have any thoughts? Anybody want to help us get through this? So for me, I see curiosity in that intersection between contribution, in the sense of being open, being vulnerable to new ideas and new thoughts, because I truly believe you never know where a good idea is going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're open to that, if you're curious about that, I would say there's a direct interplay between this notion of curiosity and the connection point in terms of the model that I espouse, and that is contribution. Any reflection on that?
No, it's funny because it is very much how we're approaching things. Really, curiosity, connection, and clarity are the three things I often will talk about. And I think your connection can look a lot of different ways, right? It can be connection to the organization, connection to the mission. It can be connection to each other. So there's lots of different sort of layers of connection that can show up in an organization when we're being intentional with how we build that culture. And I think what ultimately comes from that is this kind of clarity of what is my value here? How can I be operating at my best? And what do I need from the people around me to be supported in that? I think that those are all things that I definitely often talk about. And I definitely think those three are very interconnected.
Tell me about retention of people. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about retention of people. Do you think, in some way, and describe for me, from your perspective, how Clifton Strengths may play a role in retaining good people in the organization?
Every situation, it is in organizations where they really are trying to build a strengths culture. There is a clear data point to, if you're building a strengths culture and it becomes part of just how we all show up and the language we all use, then that belonging and that visibility and that value it's almost impossible for that not to happen. You almost don't have to work for it to happen. It nearly happens on its own, because now I have this understanding of who you are. I have this understanding of how to really support you as a colleague or as a manager or as a leader. And you understand that about me. And so it goes back to your earlier point, I think, around this vulnerability, that it doesn't mean we have to wear everything on our sleeve to be vulnerable. It just means we have to show up authentic. We have to be willing to look at what our value is and maybe what our value is not, right? What are the places where we don't excel? And so we need a partner in the organization to help us if that's what's being asked of us. And so it's just an openness and an honesty that naturally creates that belonging that I think just about everybody, at least now, is really starting to find as a deal breaker for them, right? If they can't get it in their current organization, there's a lot of folks that are going to leave to go find it. And so the more we can cultivate, the longer we're going to keep people. And it doesn't mean forever. I think one of the I've learned talking to leaders is that there's so much value in just delaying someone for a year or 2 years. We don't have to keep them for their whole career. Those days may be over. But the idea that if we can just keep the team together a year or two longer because we've invested in them, then the impact on the organization and its mission and its productivity is absolutely worth it.
Well, not only that, but if someone has gone through a strengths evaluation, for example, and has become a fully engaged member of the organization, even if they decide to leave, and this is hard for people to come to grips with, I get it. Even if they decide to leave, you are putting someone into the ecosystem of organizations and of people who are now moved on to other opportunities that makes them even stronger and better at what they do, so that whatever organization they choose to join, or even if they decide to go out on their own as an entrepreneur, they're going to bring these talents to their job and to their clients. And that in and of it is a boon to society. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think it is the long game, right? It is looking at the big picture that sometimes isn't always the way we're approaching it. I completely agree. And I think there really is no downside to investing in our people, no matter how you do that, whether that's with strengths or with something else. There really isn't a downside to putting in that intention and that effort to help them be better versions of themselves in their environment.
Yeah, I had a previous guest, Stephen Copshaw, on who said this amazing thing. He said, I want to pour so much into my people that if they decide to leave me, they will go off and do better things in other places. And I thought that was just so magnanimous, if you will, and altruistic in, again, filling the ecosystem, if you will, of really terrific people. I started my career as a naval officer many years ago, and not during sale period either. This was after the sale period. We always looked at someone rotating out after a couple of years. Be on your ship for a couple of years, and one of our goals was always to make that person as good as we could make them, help them. I wouldn't say I would make them, help them become great naval officers or enlisted folks, and send them on to their next duty assignment so that they could, in effect, invigorate the commands that they were attached to. I absolutely connect to that idea. We're getting close to the end here, so I'd like to ask you my magic question here that I've now asked people from all around the world, believe it or not. And that is, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in the world that you live in and the world that you see, what would that be and why did you choose that? I know it's a big question.
It is a big question. For me, there are so many things. If I tie it back to our conversation, no matter how someone gets there, I think it is believing that everyone is deserving of development, and having and being in places that want to develop you. I think is what I would want for everyone. Is no matter where you're at, no matter what organization you're in, you should be developed, and you should have people that believe in you and want to give that to you. That would be my wish, no matter how you go about it, because we all deserve that.
I agree. I think in the end, it's only making society better, whether they stay or move on. And my hope has always been that they themselves are developers, that they themselves develop other people down. It's the gift that keeps on giving, if you will. So I appreciate that perspective. Jen, thanks so very much for being here today on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I appreciate your time and energy. I wish you all the greatest success in the future. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you, John.